Imagine sitting in a fancy restaurant, a table full of food before you, and then a trembling voice whispers, "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Most people would ignore it, maybe even get annoyed. But what happened that night changed everything. A millionaire, used to walking past beggars and broken souls, looked up and locked eyes with a stranger. And in that instant a miracle began. This story will touch your heart and remind you of the power of kindness, so make sure you watch till the end. And hey, if you love stories that warm your soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Gentle Words, for more inspiring tales. The night was cool, the chandeliers inside the restaurant glowing like captured stars, and Edward Grant, a man who was known across the city as the kind of millionaire who wore arrogance as easily as he wore his tailored suits, sat alone at his corner table. The meal before him was more a performance than food, a golden plate with roasted lamb, an array of colorful sides, sauces drizzled like art strokes across the porcelain. He had tasted only a few bites, distracted by the endless thoughts of business deals, mergers, and numbers flashing through his restless mind. To him, food was fuel, nothing more. To others, this single plate could be salvation. He didn't notice her at first. She was too small, too quiet, her shadow barely reaching the edge of his table. But then that voice, so thin, so fragile it felt as if the wind might blow it away, rose into his world. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" He looked up sharply, his first instinct irritation. How had someone like her even gotten into this place? The restaurant was guarded, expensive, polished to perfection. But then his gaze met her eyes. And Edward froze. They weren't the eyes of someone defeated by poverty. They were eyes that had known hunger, yes, but also hope. They were deep brown, wide, glistening with unshaded tears, yet glowing with a quiet dignity that didn't match her tattered clothes. For a moment, Edward forgot the suit he wore, the wealth he carried, the reputation he guarded like a shield. For a moment, he was simply a man looking into another soul, and something in her gaze stirred something long buried inside him. "Sit," he heard himself say, though he hadn't planned to. The girl blinked, startled. "Sir, I just asked for..." "I said sit," Edward repeated, softer this time. "If you're hungry, you shouldn't be standing." She hesitated, looking around nervously, as though expecting someone to throw her out. The waiters were already watching, some with disgust, some with pity. Edward's hand rose, commanding them back. Reluctantly, the girl slid into the chair opposite him. She looked smaller now, as though the weight of the elegant restaurant pressed down on her. She kept her hands folded in her lap, afraid to touch the silver cutlery, the crystal glasses, the bread basket between them. Edward pushed his plate forward. "Eat," he said simply. The girl's lips parted as if to argue, but the growl of her stomach betrayed her. Slowly, almost reverently, she picked up the fork. She took a bite, small, careful, and Edward watched something extraordinary. Her shoulders relaxed, her trembling slowed. Her eyes closed for the briefest moment, savoring the taste, and when they opened again, there was gratitude so raw it made Edward's chest ache. "What's your name?" he asked. She swallowed quickly, as though embarrassed to be caught mid-bite. "Leela," she whispered. "Just Leela." "Well, Leela," Edward leaned back, studying her, "you chose the wrong table to beg from. Most men here would have had you thrown out." She met his gaze again, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "I wasn't begging," she said quietly, but firmly. "I don't beg. I just ask for what people don't want. Leftovers. It's easier than stealing." The words hit him harder than he expected. She said them without shame, without self-pity, as though she had made peace with survival. And Edward, who had been born into wealth, who had never known a day without choice, felt suddenly small. For the first time in years, he wondered what hunger felt like, what it was to ask for scraps, to survive not because of power but in spite of its absence. "Why here?" he asked, gesturing to the gleaming restaurant around them. "There are easier places to find food." Leela smiled faintly, though it was the kind of smile that hid pain. "Because here, leftovers mean something. People don't finish their meals not because they're full but because they can waste. I thought, maybe someone would let me share what they don't need." Edward had no answer. He had left plates untouched countless times, walked away without a thought. But sitting across from Leela, he realized those untouched plates could have been lifelines. The miracle wasn't in the food. It was in the way she made him see it. They talked as she ate, though Edward did most of the questioning. She was 17, maybe 18 at most, living in shelters when there was space, on the streets when there wasn't. Her parents were gone. Her father to illness, her mother to despair. She spoke of it quietly, as though pain was something ordinary. Yet she also spoke of dreams, dreams of studying, of painting, of one day not being invisible. Edward listened, and something inside him shifted. The arrogance that had always been his armor began to crack. He saw not a beggar but a girl with a spirit unbroken, a girl whose eyes reflected resilience he had long forgotten in his own life. And though he didn't realize it yet, this was the moment the miracle began, not for Leela, but for him. Edward Grant did not sleep that night. His mind restless as he lay in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, the glittering lights stretching endlessly like stars caught on earth. But for the first time in years those lights didn't make him feel powerful. They made him feel guilty, because somewhere out there, maybe under a bridge, or in an alley, Leela was curled up hungry again while he lay on silk sheets, and that thought refused to leave him. He tried to bury himself in business reports, financial projections, the kind of paperwork that usually numbed his heart, but her voice kept echoing in his head, "I don't beg. I just ask for what people don't want." It wasn't a plea, it was survival spoken with dignity, and Edward realized that was what unsettled him most. The fact that she had nothing yet carried herself with a pride he couldn't buy even with all his wealth. The next morning, instead of going to his office, Edward found himself walking through streets he had avoided all his life, streets where the glass towers gave way to crumbling buildings, and the scent of fresh bread was replaced by garbage and despair. He asked strangers if they had seen a girl named Leela, small, brown-eyed, about 17, and most shook their heads, uninterested. Until an old woman sitting by a soup kitchen said she sometimes saw her near the railway station. Edward went there, his polished shoes gathering dust, his expensive coat attracting stares. But he didn't care. And then he saw her, sitting cross-legged on the cold ground, sketching with a broken pencil on the back of a discarded flyer, her hair messy, her clothes thin, but her focus absolute, as though the world around her didn't exist. For a moment Edward simply watched, struck by the purity of it. How someone with nothing could still create beauty. Finally he stepped closer. She looked up, startled, and recognition flickered in her eyes. "Why are you here?" she asked softly, her tone not unkind but cautious. Edward crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. "Because last night I saw something I can't forget," he admitted. "You." She frowned, confused. "I don't understand." He gestured to the sketch in her hands. It was rough, unfinished, but the lines carried emotion, life. "You shouldn't be drawing on trash. You deserve paper, paint, everything you need to create." Leela laughed, a dry, almost bitter sound. "Dreams don't keep you warm at night, sir." Edward shook his head. "No, but they keep you alive. And I think yours are worth more than you realize." For the first time, her guardedness cracked, and he saw the flicker of longing in her eyes. He offered his hand. "Come with me." She hesitated. "Why?" "Rich men don't waste their time with girls like me." Edward's voice was steady, but his heart was racing with a strange urgency he didn't understand. "Because maybe rich men have been wasting their lives ignoring girls like you." Slowly, uncertainly, she took his hand, and that single gesture felt heavier than any contract Edward had ever signed. He brought her to his car, and though she shifted nervously in the leather seat, her gaze wide at the city rolling past, he spoke to her gently, asking about her sketches, her ideas, her colors. And for every answer she gave, he felt something healing in himself, as though her words stitched together the hollow places money had never filled. He took her not to his penthouse but to a quiet art supply store, where the smell of paper and paint filled the air. "Choose anything," he told her. Leela froze, staring at shelves stacked with sketchbooks, brushes, colors more vivid than she had ever touched. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't have." "You have me," Edward interrupted softly. "And I'm not letting you walk out empty-handed." Slowly she reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed across a sketchbook, then a set of pencils, then paints. By the time she was done, her arms were full but her eyes were fuller, shimmering with disbelief. At the counter, Edward paid without blinking. But he noticed the way she clutched the bag like it was treasure, and it made his throat tighten. On the drive back, she finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" Edward considered the question. He could have given an easy answer. Guilt, charity, pity. But none of those were true. The truth was raw, frightening. "Because when I looked into your eyes last night I saw myself," he said. She turned, puzzled. "You're nothing like me." "No," he admitted. "But I am just as lost." And she didn't laugh, didn't scoff. She simply nodded, as if she understood something words couldn't explain. Over the next days, Edward found himself seeking her out, bringing food, sometimes sitting with her while she drew, sometimes just listening as she spoke of things she longed for but never had. He began arranging for her to stay in a safe shelter, clean clothes, warm meals, but he never once treated it like charity. Instead he asked her opinions, her thoughts, her dreams, and the more she spoke, the more he realized that this girl who had asked for leftovers was feeding him something far greater. Perspective, humanity, the reminder of what life was meant to be. For years, Edward had been surrounded by people who wanted his money, his power, his name. But Leela wanted nothing. She asked only for what was discarded, and in return gave him the one thing no one else had ever offered: sincerity. And slowly, inevitably, something began to grow between them, fragile yet fierce, a bond that defied the world's logic. But the world noticed. Edward's colleagues whispered, the media questioned, society sneered at the sight of a millionaire walking with a girl in second-hand clothes. "She's using you," they said. "She's a scam," they warned. Yet Edward, for the first time in his life, didn't care what the world thought. Because when he looked into her eyes, he saw not a beggar but a miracle. The miracle of finding truth in a place he least expected.